a lot of ideas of how teachers and librarians can actually work together to support nonfiction, so I recommend reading it. I have a link later in the presentation. But I really love this piece that talks about how nonfiction literature contextualizes primary source evidence. It offers multiple perspectives on current and historic events and shares new scientific discoveries. Contemporary nonfiction addresses historical silences. It explores historic and contemporary events rooted in racism, oppression, and violence, and highlights courageous trailblazers and organized groups working together towards societal transformation and liberation. It presents cutting-edge research, offering readers not just settled information, but access to emerging understandings at the vanguard of scientific knowledge and exploration. I really love this piece because, to me, nonfiction is super exciting, and there are so many groundbreaking pieces out right now that are exciting to students. And I don't know about y'all, I work with middle school. So my middle schoolers, if they're like, my favorite one is The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, and they're like, ooh, this description says it's all the stuff you don't know about her. I want to know all that stuff, because they're nosy and they want all the gossip. And so I think it's really cool that a lot of our modern nonfiction is really kind of exposing those secrets that students get really excited about. This is also really a foundational piece of why I wanted to present about this. I love Melissa Stewart. For those of y'all that don't know her, she wrote this book, 5 Kinds of Nonfiction, which I'll refer to a few times, and I'll tell you a little bit about the 5 kinds later. But this is, hopefully it makes as much of an impression in text as it does in the graphs she has in her book. But she conducted a study in 2018 of K-12 educators, over 1,000. 56% of those people said they preferred narrative nonfiction, 36% liked both, and only 8% preferred expository nonfiction. If you look at nonfiction award winners, they are overwhelmingly awarded to narrative nonfiction. But in a previous study that she cites in 2017, 42% of students preferred expository nonfiction. So yeah, I know, and that's what she says in the book, is that when you tell people that, they're like, really? They prefer, and so 33% prefer both, and only 25% prefer narrative nonfiction. So she posits, and I think it's something to think about, is that we as librarians or teachers have to think about our own biases when doing collection development. We prefer narrative nonfiction. That's what we will probably be more drawn to read. That's what we see more of. But our students, that may not be their preference. And it also talks about how students, they want to learn things. And I think about me, that little museum person, reading all of the different signs. Like, I wanted to know things. I didn't necessarily need a story about them. I wanted to know the information. So I think that's really important for us to keep in mind as we're doing our collection development and recommendations. I also think, depending on your age, I don't want to age anybody, we're used to those traditional nonfiction series that are really boring, very cookie cutter. And a lot of nonfiction that's around today is not that nonfiction anymore. It's written in a lot more exciting writing style, less cookie cutter and generic. And research is often conducted online, so the purpose of our nonfiction collections by necessity has to shift. My students, I don't collect a lot of biographies about living people. Like, I might do memoirs, but I told them when I first got to this new library, I had a book about Kobe Bryant from, I think, 2013. And I was like, as a student, what's a really important thing that happened since that time? He passed. So those current biographies are out of date as soon as they're in print. I don't waste my time with that. But there's so many other magical nonfiction pieces. So those are some of the reasons why, other than just me personally loving it. I think how we can share it is really important. I know some people genreify, some people don't. I feel like a lot of people are spending a lot of energy in their fiction collections. And they're like, I've heard a lot of librarians like, well, nobody checks out the nonfiction. And I'm like, well, you're putting a lot of effort on the fiction side. What's gonna just make them go over there? They're not gonna necessarily just go there. So I had a kind of skewed perception in my first middle school library. I was assigned to it 2 weeks after the school year started. I was split between 2 schools. So when I showed up, I'm a half-time librarian. I walked into this, except these bookshelves weren't even here yet. So the only books that were out of the box when I got to this library were nonfiction books. The fiction books were in boxes, and I battled for about 6 months to get shelves so I could get the fiction out of the box. Something that happened because of that was actually kind of beautiful is that a lot of my kids checked out nonfiction, and through the rest of my years, 4 years at that school, my kids really read the nonfiction because they were just used to it. And if you look, it's funny, if you're able to zoom into this picture later, you can see the entire return card is nonfiction. nonfiction books, including a nice Minecraft guide. So this kind of just set me up to be thinking about nonfiction more from the get-go, because that's all I had. Also, that was just really traumatic going there. So my current middle school library, when I got there, I have an amazing assistant, and she was there before me, and she told me when we got there, I have nonfiction one side, fiction in the other. The students don't get books from that side of the library, which is discouraging, but I also looked at that side of the library, and I saw a lot of neglect. My school opened in 2004, and a lot of the nonfiction books were from the opening day collection. There was not a lot of love given to that side. I can tell a lot of the money was not put over there. There was just I sensed disinterest in it, and it was not appealing. So I don't blame the students for not going to that side. So once I got there, I weeded a lot of the old nonfiction. And that was another thing that my assistant told me. I weeded and shifted, and she's like, it looks like we have more books now. Just because when they were all crammed and you just saw these old spines, they're not going to be able to find nonfiction. I also have strong opinions about nonfiction graphic novels. And I made some very intentional decisions with this. So some of the nonfiction graphic novels when I got there were in nonfiction, and some were with the graphic novels. To me, it was a choice of content or form. The content in my nonfiction books belonged to me in the nonfiction section. Graphic novel is just the format that it's in. So for me, if I have a student that wants to find books about cats, they shouldn't have to go find the cats and then go to the nonfiction section to try to find my science comic about cats. The information should be in the same place. I also strongly preferred to do that just because I think there's always going to be those teachers that look down on graphic novels. And so to me, it was a way to kind of counter that and be like, this is a nonfiction book in that format. It's in the nonfiction section. So some of it was also intentionally thinking about that battle, which, do y'all still have that battle? Anybody? So it was a really intentional decision that I thought a lot about and ultimately put them in nonfiction. I also was like, if there's graphic novels over there, that's gonna be one thing that pulls the students over there. So like, oh, I love science comics, I'm gonna go over there. I also wanted to add some visual interest because, like I said, it was boring and drab over there. As I said, this is my first Canva presentation, but not my first Canva rodeo. One of the first things I did was created giant posters, and this makes it easier for me and them because, say, 700, 800, they're bright, they're fun, kids, they're appealing to the kids. This is my biography area. I did a lot of reading, so I could have multiple displays. This is right now, I have Women's History and Black History. I'm still at this. 28 days isn't enough. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot with that kind of thing just because if it's visually dead compared to your fiction section, they're not going to go over there. I'm also really intentional with my displays, and I know we all have different types of space too. Some of this you have to think about what's going to work for your space. I have a rolling display that's pretty cool, and so this one I will always have different nonfictions, and I rotate this a lot, so there's a reason to go to it because I'll change it monthly, if not more. This is my current display. Every year I do a fundraiser for books for my birthday, and this year they were books about Asia and Africa and Australia, and so that's what's up there right now. I also really intentionally, I have my general display that's up front. I intermix the two. I don't want just fiction up front. When it's horror fiction time, I include traditional scary things up front with horror fiction. So I think it's really important just when they come in, it's not just assault of fiction in your face. Make sure you're including all of those different books. So just some other ideas. I include nonfiction and biography in all of my book speed datings that I do with kids. So I have 6 tables they rotate to. I have a nonfiction, a biography, and then fiction or other things. So I always include those as types of stories just because I think getting books in front of kids where they open them and look inside them, it helps. I personally read nonfiction, and I know I also hear people being like, oh, I don't want to read nonfiction. Here's the thing about young adult and middle school nonfiction is that it's written for potentially reluctant readers. So reading like the YA versions of things, I tell everyone I've never read the adult version of Just Mercy. I've read the YA version like 5 times with students now, and it's written just in a way that's easier to read a lot of times, so it makes it a faster read for us too. Include nonfiction if you do. I know I advertise this for middle and high. I know not all of us do read alouds all the time, but whether that's your read alouds, book talks, first chapter Fridays, or other promotional materials, are you including nonfiction? It's interesting because after this, Kirsty James out there and I are doing a presentation about diversity and equity and inclusion, and I think of my nonfiction, I think of my nonfiction in the same way. Like, am I including nonfiction in my displays? Am I consistently making sure that my nonfiction is out there, or am I always recommending fiction? I also actively have taught about nonfiction, and it's funny because on Monday, one of my teachers was just mentioning this lesson that we taught this year. I know I was mentioning earlier, Melissa Stewart has this idea about the 5 kinds of nonfiction, and I highly recommend this book in case you can't tell. But it's really cool because I was able to teach about this to our 6th graders so that they can think about different types of nonfiction and differentiate between them. So the way that she has it set up is that there is, obviously you have your narrative nonfiction and then types of expository. She divides it up to where there's active nonfiction. Those are like your how-to books, recipe books, how to sew, how-to books. And a lot of kids really like that because they want to know how to do things. That was when I did this lesson, a lot of kids strongly preferred that. Browsable is your kind of book where you don't have to read it cover to cover. You're getting those nuggets of information about different things, but you don't have to read the whole book. There's traditional, and this is the kind that a lot of us older folks think of as nonfiction when we're thinking about it. Expository literature is, for me it's harder to define, but I know it when I see it. It's going to be about those nonfiction topics. It's not in a narrative form, but it has a lot more originality in the style. So I think books like, I don't know if y'all have seen like Sniffer Dogs or those kind of things. There's a lot of sciencey ones about it where it has lots of insets, lots of extra details, and it's not written in a fluid narrative style. It may have some narrative story chapters in the midst of it, but they're really creative and fun. And then obviously you have your narrative nonfiction, which I'll bring back Just Mercy again. When we read that with my students in a book club a couple of years ago, I still remember one student, after we read the first chapter out loud, he's like, and he didn't quite know the word, but he meant to be like, it's so literary. Like, and so he hadn't really been exposed to that style of nonfiction where it is like a story. So I think that's also important to let students know that there are different types of nonfiction. And so now I think it's really helped my students to navigate and know there's different types and what they want, even if they don't remember all of those names. All right, any shares from the crowd about things you've done to circulate your nonfiction or exciting ideas? Yes.
I always have kids asking like what I've been reading recently because I display it, everywhere as much as I can, and I have like my regular school recommendations. So I started having a couple of displays, like there's called what is Miss May's reading, and I always make sure that at least half are nonfiction books that I like, and just having them on display integrated with the rest of the fiction books has done wonders.
Yeah.
Actually, my project this year was nonfiction. They took away a lot of my shelves, and there was all just random there. So I did a huge niche, so I could turn stuff out when I go to the store. And I also had my art class in content design and doing posters. So I came like taught them, these are about this, these are about this. Posters and things. I remember that. And I also kind of doing I moved some stuff around.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like I moved, I moved like slavery and civil rights into American history and stuff like that. And I wondered if anybody else has done that.
Yeah, I definitely fudge Dewey as well, and that would be like a whole other presentation, but I know like religion's one where I've moved stuff around a lot. You'll see it in a minute, but my kids love my like religion and mythology. It's like, this is really interesting. Yeah.
So what I did, I know you said you put your graphic novel nonfictions into the nonfiction, but I put them with the graphic novels, but I've got a section for graphic novel nonfiction.
Yeah.
And so, like, I have kids that specifically want the graphic novel, I can be like, all right, I've got fictions and I've got the non-fictions.
That's what I do too.
Yeah.
Follow on the same first comments, and how do you read, because you're new doing the work, the ones that you're moving into the next section, how are you determining that?
So there's definitely, I think, and somebody can help me, is it Ditch Dewey? There's definitely like online groups. So like the stuff that I've done with religion, if you look online, there's people that like geek out about Dewey on the internet, and there's like alternate systems. What were you going to tell me?
So, I want to mention this because I moved schools in the library, and she's not in here, you can tell her. She kind of was like, oh my gosh, because I did fudge, like, the example of moving the slavery, to the American history. But I guess, like, using a label, you don't have to, like, totally remove, it's just something, some type of indicator helps me.
And to me, like, okay, so when I fudge things, I can look up the topic headings and be like, this is where this would be in terms of time period and this and that and the other. So I think it's really like you thinking about the ease of use for your students, and if they do want those books to all be in the same number, realistically, the Dewey police aren't going to come find you if you put a random number on it. So for me, it's more just like that actual navigation. I strongly make my students use the catalog. Me and the teachers have been working really hard just because we've been finding better results of where they're like, oh, I actually want to read this book because it's the thing that I search for with my topics. So to me, it's like, as long as they have the number and can find it on the shelf, it doesn't really matter what the number is. What were you going to say?
Oh, I've been doing, I have a reluctant book club.
Nice.
Voluntold Path. And the original idea hasn't worked out, so I've been just doing read alouds for the kids, but they're always nonfiction read alouds from picture books, because I've got a great collection of picture books. Those are great.
Yeah.
Women's history,
I definitely, even though I'm at middle school, I love picture books and love collecting them. I do weekly read alouds for my exceptional ed students, which are basically almost always biographies or nonfiction of some sort. And I find that my other readers also enjoy them. And the thing that's great, and it's actually funny because I just did this myself, there's this amazing biography called Unbound about the life of Judith Scott. She was a fiber artist who had Down syndrome and was institutionalized for 35 years of her life until her sister got her out of institution and sent her to this like art collective, and she started making art and is like world renowned as an artist. So I read the picture book and immediately went and got the full biography at the library. And so I think it's cool like to have those things because it gives like that little thing where if somebody's like, oh, book's amazing, it's a low commitment. But if they're interested, then they can go read more. So yeah, I love picture books. All right. So some titles. As you can see, there's been pictures throughout the show, which you can definitely look up. So this is just sort of at my school, what is the most popular? I'm pretty sure sports is always one. I have a lot of kids that like to read African American history. It's predominantly my African American students, but some other students do as well. Military is big, mythology, religion, animals, video games, true crime, which I feel like is a tie-in to what everybody likes outside of the library too. My kids always want to know about making money and businesses, poetry, outer space, and then the active, browsable nonfiction are really popular. So those are kind of places where I've been focusing. Just a few titles. True crime. Oh my God, y'all. My kids want all the murder books all the time. And murder books for middle schoolers are usually not a big thing. But there are some available, and a lot of these I think would go to either grade level. I am a huge fan of the young readers edition of adult books, and it's kind of cool too just because the kids feel like grown because they're reading it, adults read too, but it's, at that, it depends. I don't know. Y'all can let me know what you think, but usually the young reader edition I found, it explains things a little better and usually takes out foul language. So for instance, Just Mercy, the big differences are it explains legal things more to like a non-legal knowing audience, and then it takes out the N-word. Those are the major differences holistically between the adult and the young adult version. Killers of the Flower Moon is going to be a movie soon. It will blow your mind if you haven't read it. That one I've only read the adult version. Oh yeah, Radium Girls is a great one too, for sure. I just started getting this FBI files. Like I said, it's hard to find murder books for middle schoolers that are going to be school appropriate. So I'm like, well, this is also crime. I am huge. I love graphic nonfiction series. At both of my libraries, I've purchased the science comics for them, and they fly off the shelf. Does anybody else have that series? Yeah. I love that.
There's also a manga human body.
Oh,
Thing
nice.
that
Oh my gosh. History comics, I wasn't a huge fan at the beginning, but they're starting to get like more interesting, diverse authors, and I think they're getting better as they go along. But yeah, the kids are also into the history comics. Hazardous Tales, always extremely popular. Joel Christian Gill has this, he's a comic creator. So he has these tales of the talented 10th that are Black history heroes in action. This is one about Bessie Stringfield, sorry. That was really amazing because I didn't know a lot about her life. I only read that one. And then My Olympian series is always popular. Those are never on the shelf. They love mythology stuff. Also, biographies and memoirs, and like I said, I always put these in my, what do you call this? Book speed dating things. But they love these too. And a lot of these just sell themselves. Anthony Ray Hinton was on death row for 29 years for a murder he did not commit. And if you tell that to a kid, they're gonna be like, what? And his book is amazing. This book, This Promise of Change, is by Joanne Allen Boyce. I always tell them, y'all know Cameron Boyce, the Disney star that passed. That's his grandma. And she was one of the kids that was going to the first desegregated schools. And so right there, they're like, oh, I know him. And so that's always a good sell too. I'm sure y'all from the March. This one's really cool too. Yeah.
it's so cool inside. I always
It
open
is.
it up and show the kids
Yeah,
what it's
because
like inside.
it's all this red and blue color scheme, and once again, it's like the plot to kill Hitler. I'm gonna read about killing Hitler. So those are all some good examples. I really could have put recommendations all day. I'm also stealing from my later presentation as well because Christy and I came up with some Destiny collections. So I have links when you get this to inclusive biographies and inclusive nonfiction. I do want to give Christy a shout out because I hadn't used collections in a while and I didn't realize how much better they are than they used to be. Oh, I don't know why. I'll fix that link in a second. But Christy, we got to fix the link. But let me get it real quick. Yeah. I don't know why. I think they might be private still. Oh, sorry. Give me 1 second to pull that up, y'all. Now, obviously with these, I was limited by the books that I had in my collection or Berkeley County collections, but you can create your own and it will at least let you see the titles.
Is that are those collections stuff that access to?
You can, yes, you can make them available for the students as well, and that's something I need to start doing more of now that I know.
Call you and ask.
Yeah, just call me. I got you. It's still clunky in some ways. I discovered while doing this, I don't know if y'all have done this, you can create a list in Destiny and then import it into collections, but only of your own books. So I made one of like all of my Berkeley County ones and tried to import it and I couldn't, and I got spicy about it. So once we get these links operational, you'll have access to them. But just a bunch of titles that are there that might be interesting. In general, it's important to think inclusively. I read another article that talked about, as with all parts of our collection, we need to be thinking about whose stories we're telling and who's telling those stories. So some of these will also help with that kind of side of being intentional about including diverse nonfiction in your nonfiction. But I like it because it, has the pretty covers and all that stuff you can add. Or I think you can also copy this and then reform it to your collection, if that makes sense. So feel free to steal our stuff and make it better. So finally, I have no idea how fast I'm talking. I'm really bad at that always. Okay, I went really fast. I did include references to a lot of the stuff that I read for this. I'm a big nerd about reading about library stuff. I know not everybody is into professional literature as I am, but I really highly recommend these. The position statement on the role of nonfiction literature, like I was saying, has a lot of good tips on how that would look in an English classroom, and it's for English teachers, so it's also telling them how to collaborate with your librarian. But it's something where we can take that and be like, here's how we can collaborate together and include this nonfiction. So there's an article about it from School Library Journal, as well as one from Education Week. We have a link to Melissa Stewart's website and books. She also has a great book that she and another person edited about, where they ask nonfiction writers about their craft. That's really cool. That could be a way to work with your science and social studies teachers in particular, because you could examine nonfiction writers' craft and the process to think about their nonfiction writing. And then there's also a couple, these are available from Education Full Text through Discus, but there was a couple of these other ones as well. I realize I talked really fast. This is always my problem when I'm first giving a presentation. But yeah, any ideas or questions or things we want to share? Oh yes, it's bit.ly and then it's Lewis SCASL23. They do, yeah. Okay, so capital L, E-W-I-S, all caps SCASL.
Is it available now?
Yeah, it should be. And if it's not, let me know, please. Canvas. I do know that the internet here is slow and Canva is slow. Oh, scientists in the field? Yeah, that's another, Gabby was asking me about another series, and some of y'all may have it. I think this skews more towards the middle school side, but the Scientists in the Field series is another really good nonfiction series.
I was trying to remember.
Yeah, and that's definitely in that expository side of stuff. Any other questions, ideas? Where are my nonfiction lovers at? Yeah, okay. I think, and if I could, really, please read nonfiction. It really will help your reader's advisory. And I know sometimes it's like the icky medicine we don't want to take, but modern nonfiction literature is so much better than I remember when I was a kid. I feel like authors are really doing amazing literary things with it. So, questions, concerns? Yes.
You said you put graphic novels in your nonfiction. What about
Mostly no. Actually, I pretty much include those as well. Like all my biography picture books are in the biographies. Most of my nonfiction picture books are in the nonfiction. So and then I have like fiction picture books. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Where do you look for good recommendations for nonfiction? As I see most recommendations for nonfiction being there.
Yeah, I think I will say that if you go to Melissa Stewart's website, she'll take you down a rabbit hole with that. The whole book talks about a lot of really good authors, and then I think that's a good rabbit hole to start on, because she definitely, and she works actively with a lot of nonfiction authors, which I think is kind of cool. So I think that's a good starting page, for sure. Any other questions, concerns, cries for help from all my students?
How do you, I love nonfiction, but I get really overwhelmed by like the nonfiction that's like on every element of the periodic table or something, and each one is so thin, and maybe one kid will check out that book for a single project maybe in 3 years, and I want to get it because one kid is going to check out that book in 3 years, but I get so overwhelmed with so much of it is on my shelf, and then I'm weeding, and I feel like I'm going to get rid of something important, but also, oh my god, nobody's checking this book out, I'm going to go insane. What do you do?
That's the kind of spot where I'm like, there's databases that can do that.
Yeah.
And so I think don't feel as guilty about it, like,
Because I wanna read it, but then like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, what do y'all think?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, you can find that stuff online.
Yeah.
But get the books that would be more inspiring and they don't.
I'm
Yeah.
pushing our databases as much as possible, and I'm trying to push back against the teachers that are so
Yeah.
like, it's gotta be a book, and it's like,
I do have teachers too though. Here's the thing is that I tell my teachers, I have like one science teacher who before every unit comes and checks out books. So I'm not gonna read those books because I know she uses them every year. So you can also just be kind of like, use it or lose it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I try to focus on ebooks as much as possible, especially multi-user ebooks for nonfiction, just because no shelf space.
Yeah.
And they only really need it for a small section of the book, when they're researching or elements or whatever, and then you don't go as bad maybe
Yeah.
later.
Because you're replacing it with something
Yeah.
that's providing the resource.
Exactly.
I guess I just needed validation that yes, I can.
Yeah, I definitely, and that's what I think about. I'm like, my nonfiction collection is for reading. It's really
Yeah.
not as much for research.
Because I do push our
Yeah.
databases, so I just
Yeah.
didn't think I needed the paddle in that.
On that note, at one of the meetings we were at, we were kind of talking about that concept too of keeping the book and how for a while the concept was that students had to have a print and an electronic, but colleges aren't requiring that. Like, so we even confirmed with Dr. Spearing, it's like, no, we don't require that anymore. So that was kind of the validation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we were doing it to prepare them for the future, but
The future is here.
yes.
The future is here. And I mean, there's some of that stuff. Like I said, for some reason, my kids are obsessed with outer space. So I'm gonna like lay off reading the outer space because they're reading it. But yeah. And like the sports ones, I'm always gonna have them ones because
Yeah.
sports ones are always gonna go. But yeah, I don't think of my nonfiction collection as a
And all
research
the little
piece.
Minecraft guides, those are gonna.
Oh God, yes. Any other questions? Well, my contact information is there. Feel free to email me. I love talking about nonfiction. If you have good recommendation, let me know. Because I always want to read more.